Picture this for a moment. What if a cutting-edge AI system picks up a book that is 2,000 years old, one that has been wrapped in mystery and controversy for centuries, and then announces it contains a significant clue tied to the year 2026? Should that be dismissed as pure coincidence, or might there be something deeper worth exploring? That is exactly the question that has been grabbing so many people's attention lately. When Grok 4 was prompted with questions about the Book of Enoch in the year 2026, its reply went far beyond a straightforward answer. It drew connections between different sections of this ancient writing, its internal timeline, and the ideas expressed within it, putting forward an interpretation that caused many people to pause and reflect. But before we move any further along, one thing needs to be made absolutely clear. We are not here to claim that any prophecy is real or accurate, and we are certainly not trying to stir up fear. What we are going to do is understand what the Book of Enoch actually is, why so many consider it to be something extraordinary, what Grok 4 discovered within its pages, and why the year 2026 keeps surfacing. We will also take a close look at just how solid this AI-driven interpretation really is, and where it falls short. Before we get into all of that, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Now let us start at the beginning and understand what the Book of Enoch truly is. Over recent years, this book has found its way back into public conversation, yet it is anything but new. Scholars believe it was composed roughly 2,000 years ago. It belongs to the tradition of ancient Jewish religious writings and is connected to Enoch, the figure who appears in the book of Genesis. According to Genesis, Enoch was the 7th generation descendant of Adam. What sets him apart is that unlike other figures of his time, he was not said to have passed away in the conventional sense. Rather, the text describes how he walked alongside God, and then God took him. Because of this, Enoch occupies a remarkable and distinctive place within ancient religious traditions. The version most widely discussed today goes by the name First Enoch. The book itself is not a short piece of writing. It's a substantial volume divided into several sections. 5 major parts make up its structure, and each one focuses on a distinct subject. One part deals with heavenly figures known as the Watchers, who descended to earth and stepped beyond the boundaries meant for humanity. Another section introduces the Nephilim, described as enormous and extraordinarily powerful beings. The text also explores the organization of heaven, the way time is measured, and a particular celestial calendar. Moving further along, the narrative traces the path of human civilization before arriving at the theme of final judgment. This is precisely why so many readers regard the Book of Enoch as something beyond an ordinary religious writing. They see it as a rare document that weaves together ideas about history, belief, and what lies ahead. That said, not every faith tradition embraces everything recorded within its pages, so when approaching this book, it's worth keeping in mind the distinction between what can be verified historically and what reflects later interpretation. Which brings us to an important question. If this book was held in such high regard, why did it fail to make it into most versions of the Bible? The answer isn't straightforward, because it touches on history, religious communities, and the choices those communities made. Let's start with the New Testament, and more specifically the Epistle of Jude. That letter contains a direct quote drawn from the Book of Enoch. This alone tells us the book was hardly unknown during the early years of Christianity. Scholars widely agree that it was being read at the time and that its contents were familiar to people. Another significant piece of evidence comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among those ancient manuscripts discovered in the desert, multiple copies of the Book of Enoch were found. This revealed that the Essene community, one of the prominent Jewish religious groups of that era, treated the book as something meaningful and worth preserving. Put simply, this was no obscure or hidden text. It was actively read, carefully kept, and genuinely valued by the people of its time. Later, when religious authorities were working to establish the official list of sacred texts known as the canon, a great many writings came under discussion. Through that process, the Book of Enoch ended up being left outside the official canon, followed by most Christian traditions. But there is an important point worth understanding here. It was not excluded because anyone officially declared it false or entirely unworthy of trust. Historians point to several contributing factors, among them long-standing religious traditions, varying theological perspectives, and the complicated nature of how the biblical canon was shaped over time. However, the story certainly does not stop there. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church never set this book aside. Even to this day, the Book of Enoch holds the status of official scripture within that tradition and remains part of its Bible. That is actually one of the key reasons the book managed to survive and is still accessible to readers all around the world. So on one hand, there are traditions that chose to place it outside the canon, while on the other hand, there is a church that has carefully guarded it across many centuries. Perhaps that is precisely why the Book of Enoch keeps drawing so much curiosity and attention even now. So what exactly did Grok say? Let us get into the question that set this whole conversation in motion. Someone put a straightforward question to Grok. What does the Book of Enoch say about the year 2026? Under normal circumstances, an artificial intelligence would respond with a general summary of the book or walk through its historical background. But this time, the answer turned out to be somewhat different. Rather than simply quoting a few lines, Grok examined the book's overall structure, traced its internal timeline, and drew connections between various sections to offer a thorough and layered interpretation. That is the reason its response attracted so much notice. Grok began by approaching the Book of Enoch as a single unified structure. Put another way, it did not lean on just one chapter or a single passage of prophecy. Instead, it wove together different portions of the book and considered the broader picture that emerged when those pieces were viewed as a whole. Scholars often refer to this kind of approach as structural reading. Rather than treating the text as a loose collection of separate stories, the entire work is seen as one connected whole. From there, the AI went on to compare the timeline laid out in the book against actual historical events and various periods across human history, something that can be described as a historical timeline approach. According to Grok, when the complete framework is looked at together, the book stops looking like a simple record of ancient happenings. It starts to feel more like a blueprint theory, a structured framework attempting to explain different phases of human civilization. One of the more striking observations was that the earlier chapters of the Book of Enoch suggest the visions revealed to Enoch were never intended solely for the people of his own era. The text indicates these messages were carefully preserved for a generation far into the future. Grok placed more weight on this particular point than on anything else within its analysis. It brought up the question of whether that distant future generation might actually be the one alive right now, and this is precisely where the year 2026 enters the conversation. Grok never claimed the book directly names the year 2026. What it said instead was that when various timelines, numerical patterns, and historical sequences found within the book are pieced together, certain interpretations appear to gesture toward the present moment. In its view, 2026 is not a firm prophecy, but rather a potential point of interpretation. Once this response was shared, widespread discussion followed. Some researchers found it a genuinely interesting line of study, while others pointed out it was ultimately an AI reading and should not be treated as established historical fact. The real debate, in other words, was never about whether the book itself exists, but about how much trust can reasonably be placed in any interpretation of it. Now we arrive at what Grok itself described as the strongest pillar of its entire analysis, the theory of 70 generations, referenced in Chapter 10 of the first Book of Enoch. The heavenly beings who defied divine law, referred to as the Watchers, were not immediately made to face consequences for their actions. Rather, they were held in a kind of imprisonment for 70 generations, awaiting the final reckoning. This particular number went on to become one of the most debated elements within the entire text. So the natural question that follows is, just how long is a period of 70 generations? And this is precisely where interpretations begin to diverge. Ancient writings never spell out a clear, fixed length for a single generation. Certain people put it at roughly 20 years. Others lean toward 30 years, and some suggest the span could be even greater. Because of these varying estimates, calculating 70 generations can produce wildly different outcomes depending on the method used. This is why a number of researchers turned their attention to the biblical genealogies. They attempted to trace the lineage recorded after Enoch and construct various historical timelines from that foundation. Yet even using this approach, scholars did not all arrive at the same destination. Some of these models conclude somewhere around our current time, while others land on points a bit earlier or somewhat later. This ongoing disagreement is one of the central reasons why no unified consensus has ever fully formed on the topic. Grok examined these various scholarly frameworks before drawing its own conclusions. According to certain interpretive models, the 70-generation period appears to reach its endpoint somewhere in the present era. However, one crucial thing needs to be made clear here. The AI never presented this as a scientifically established truth. It simply noted that certain historical and interpretive frameworks point in that general direction. There is also another significant detail found within the Book of Enoch itself. The conclusion of the 70 generations is not portrayed as something that happens in a single moment. Instead, it is framed as a transitional period of judgment, a gradual shift in the existing order. In essence, it describes a stretch of time during which old structures slowly begin to give way and a process of reckoning takes shape. It is not tied to any one specific date or sudden occurrence. This is a key reason why many people hesitate to view the year 2026 as a definitive prophetic endpoint. Even if this theory is accepted, many point out that it may simply mark the opening of a period during which gradual shifts begin to show themselves. At the same time, numerous historians and religious scholars argue that this remains purely an interpretation rather than any confirmed prophecy. Aligning the timelines found in ancient writings with the modern calendar in a precise manner is simply not a straightforward task. So the most significant takeaway from this whole discussion is that the 70 generations theory functions as an interpretive framework. It should never be treated as absolute truth or as some fixed, unchangeable prediction. Different scholars read it in entirely different ways, and that is exactly why the conversation around it carries on to this day. Now, the Watchers and the Nephilim. Let us turn our attention to the Watchers, because this section is widely regarded as the most talked about portion of the Book of Enoch. According to the text, a group of 200 Watchers, described as heavenly beings, made their way down to earth. The place they reportedly chose for their descent was Mount Hermon. Once gathered there, they made a collective oath among themselves so that not one of them could withdraw from the decision they had made together. Following that, they began involving themselves in the affairs of the human world. As the book describes it, these Watchers entered into unions with human women, and from those pairings came beings known as the Nephilim. These beings are portrayed as enormous, immensely powerful, and deeply destructive in nature. The text goes on to say that as time passed, they brought growing chaos and harm upon the earth. But the story does not stop there. According to the Book of Enoch, the Watchers also passed along to humanity certain forms of knowledge that were considered wholly unsuitable for people at that time. This knowledge reportedly covered areas such as crafting weapons, reading the stars, practicing sorcery, and various other disciplines that tend to be labeled as forbidden knowledge in modern discussions. The book states that once this knowledge began to be used irresponsibly, wrongdoing and destruction spread further and further across the world. This mounting corruption is later presented within the text as one of the central reasons behind the arrival of the Great Flood. The Nephilim, as the texts describe, were wiped out by the Great Flood, yet their spirits lingered on. The Watchers themselves faced a different fate. They were locked away as a consequence of their actions, and tradition holds that they remain confined until the day of final reckoning. People today approach these ideas from very different angles. Some take them as accounts of genuine events, while many scholars and researchers regard them as symbolic narratives. From that perspective, the Watchers may represent forces that handed humanity tremendous knowledge and power long before people were truly equipped to handle such things responsibly. That is precisely why, in the modern era, this whole story tends to be understood as a symbolic reading rather than a verified piece of history. So the question becomes, how did Grok connect the ancient tale of the Watchers to the world we live in now? One thing needs to be stated right away. The AI never suggested that the Book of Enoch speaks directly about modern technology or present-day events. What it pointed out was that certain patterns described within the book seem to echo particular situations unfolding in the world today. Put simply, this is purely a matter of interpretation, not an established or proven fact. The first parallel drawn was with artificial intelligence. AI is moving forward at a remarkable pace these days. New capabilities emerge every few months. Yet a great many experts argue that the rate at which AI is developing far outstrips the growth of ethical frameworks frameworks and meaningful safety measures. Grok drew a comparison between this reality and the ancient notion of the Watchers passing on knowledge to humans before they were truly ready to carry it wisely. The second example brought up was genetic editing. Technologies now exist that are capable of altering the genes of living organisms. In many situations, these tools hold genuine promise for advancing medicine, yet they continue to stir deep ethical debate. According to Grok, this represents yet another reflection of that same underlying idea that powerful knowledge tends to arrive first, while the guidelines for using it responsibly tend to follow much later. Just as it happened back then, today's information networks have linked every corner of the globe. Social platforms, massive digital systems, and algorithmic tools can push content out to tens of millions of people in a matter of minutes. Yet those same tools can just as easily be turned toward spreading false narratives or shaping what the public believes. Grok described this as one of the contemporary expressions of manipulation. It also highlighted that when tremendous power and cutting-edge technology end up concentrated among a handful of individuals or major institutions, questions around accountability grow far more urgent. Grok tied this line of thinking to influential elites, large organizations, and the weight of human choices. Put simply, the real issue is not the technology on its own, but the sense of responsibility carried by those who wield it. The Book of Enoch also tells us that the Great Flood did not arrive without warning. Long before it came, corruption, disorder, and a steady moral unraveling had been building over an extended period. Grok proposed that this pattern holds a certain resemblance to the world we live in today. But that does not mean identical events are necessarily on the horizon. It is purely a symbolic parallel, one that some people find meaningful, while many others remain unconvinced. So Grok's broader analysis is really an effort to draw connections between the present age and an ancient written tradition, rather than to deliver any firm forecast about what lies ahead. That is precisely why it ought to be treated as one interpretation among many, never as the definitive answer. Yet there is another portion of the Book of Enoch that draws far less attention, despite the fact that numerous scholars regard it as among the most remarkable sections in the whole text. It goes by the name the Astronomical Book, spanning chapters 72 through 82. Here, the narrative steps away from dramatic storytelling and turns instead toward time, the changing seasons, and the structured order of the skies. This section lays out a 364-day calendar. The full year is broken into 4 equal seasons, each one containing 13 weeks. In other words, the entire system operates according to a fixed and well-balanced framework. That approach is presented in the text as the correct method for measuring time. It further explains that all of creation functions according to a fixed order, and that humanity is meant to live in alignment with that order. Interestingly enough, a very similar calendar has also been linked to the Essenes, an ancient Jewish sect. A comparable system of tracking time appears as well in the Book of Jubilees. For these reasons, many scholars have concluded that certain religious communities of that era regarded this calendar as particularly significant. Grok also brought this calendar into its analysis, attempting to place this old timekeeping system alongside the modern one. The greatest difficulty here, however, is that the world today runs on the Gregorian calendar, which differs considerably from the one described in the Book of Enoch. Because of that difference, aligning the two with full precision is no simple task. Certain contemporary readings also draw connections between shifting weather conditions, environmental disruption, and changes in the natural world with the symbolic language found in this portion of the text. Still, it is worth keeping in mind that these remain interpretations held by particular individuals. There is no actual evidence that the book directly foretells today's climate conditions or the happenings of any given year. Put simply, the Astronomical Book reveals that the Book of Enoch is far more than a collection of mysterious tales. It also offers a distinctive way of understanding time, the natural world, and the concept of order itself. That said, modern readings of this section carry their own set of limitations, and therefore should never be accepted as absolute or final truth. Now we turn to the Apocalypse of Weeks, widely regarded as the most structured historical framework within the entire Book of Enoch. In this section, the full span of human history is broken down into 10 separate weeks, or 10 broad periods of time. The word week here does not refer to a span of 7 days, but rather stands for lengthy, sweeping eras of history. Every week within this framework represents a distinct era and illustrates how the world progresses through time. The structure opens with the Age of Enoch and then traces the path of human civilization step by step. Each week carries its own character and role. As the narrative advances, the contrast between righteousness and corruption grows increasingly visible. That is precisely why so many people regard it as a symbolic lens through which history can be understood. Among all the weeks, the 8th and the 9th draw the greatest amount of attention. According to the text, the 8th week is portrayed as a period when fractures begin to show within a broken and corrupt order. Things that had been concealed for a very long time start gradually surfacing into plain view. People begin raising questions about the flaws embedded within governments, institutions, and society as a whole. This does not point to any single moment, but rather to a slow and steady process of transformation. Following that comes the description of the 9th week. It is presented as the opening stage of a period of reckoning. Yet again, it is not depicted as something that unfolds on one particular day. Rather, it is shown as a lengthy era of change, during which the line separating good from evil becomes ever more defined. For this reason, many scholars suggest that reckoning here may carry a broader meaning, not only consequence, but a fundamental shift in the existing order of things. In its examination, Grok attempted to draw a connection between this framework and the world we live in today. It proposed that if this entire timeline is treated as an interpretive model, certain people believe the current era sits somewhere between the 8th and the 9th week. Building on that idea, the year 2026 is described as part of a transitional phase, a time of meaningful change. Even so, it remains essential to keep in mind that this is not a fixed or confirmed prophecy, and no scientific basis exists to back it up. It is simply one interpretation put forward by certain individuals, and by no means do all experts share that view. To put it plainly, the Apocalypse of Weeks does not attempt to pinpoint any one specific date. Rather than offering a straightforward historical account, this section presents a religious and symbolic framework for understanding history across different eras. And even now, various people approach it through entirely different lenses. Forbidden knowledge and artificial intelligence. So let's get to the part that Grok connected most strongly to the modern world. This is the concept of forbidden knowledge, understanding that arrived in human hands before people were truly ready to handle it with wisdom. This idea runs through the story of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch. According to that text, these beings passed on many powerful abilities and secrets to humanity, but the way that knowledge was misused eventually turned into one of the greatest sources of trouble the world had ever seen. According to Grok, a very similar pattern can be observed in certain technologies of our own time. Take artificial intelligence as a starting point. The pace at which AI has moved forward over the past several years is something nobody can ignore. These days, AI can compose written content, produce images, put together videos, and carry out countless tasks that once belonged exclusively to human beings. Yet alongside all of that progress, one critical question keeps coming up. Is our moral awareness and our framework of rules keeping pace with the technology that's racing ahead? That same concern carries over into genetic engineering as well. Scientists today are developing tools capable of altering the very building blocks of life. Such breakthroughs could open the door to treating many severe illnesses, but worries about where things could go wrong are growing just as fast. Put simply, technology doesn't carry a label of good or bad on its own. What truly matters is who holds it and what they choose to do with it. Grok also highlighted that today's large institutions and sprawling digital systems hold more sway over society than at any previous point. Algorithms on social platforms and dominant online networks can quietly mold how people think, what information reaches them, and even which choices they end up making. So the deeper question isn't just about the technology itself, it's about the sense of responsibility carried by those who hold the reins over it. When technology is handled with openness and a sense of duty, it has the potential to serve humanity well. But when it exists purely to expand power or tighten control, the outcomes can look very different. Among the most fascinating aspects of this whole examination is the deep irony sitting right at its center. The Book of Enoch is widely regarded as a text that cautions against the careless handling of powerful knowledge. And yet, that very same text is now being studied and interpreted by a modern artificial intelligence. Grok itself acknowledged that this particular situation deserves some serious reflection. Simply put, AI is an extraordinarily capable instrument, but what it ultimately produces will depend on the mind mindset and the motivations of those directing it. That is precisely why the central takeaway from this entire conversation has less to do with technology and far more to do with the choices human beings make. Every significant discovery opens doors to fresh possibilities while simultaneously introducing new complications. At the end of the day, it is always the people involved who determine how that kind of power gets applied. So the question worth asking now is this: if the Book of Enoch points toward a specific period in time, what would that period actually look like? In response to that, the book lays out several markers that many connect to signs and threshold theory, though once again it must be kept in mind that this remains a religious reading, not a claim rooted in scientific evidence. The first of these markers is the spread of harm, a slow and steady normalization of destructive behavior within society. The book suggests that when such behavior quietly becomes routine and people stop reacting to it, that shift itself should be treated as a warning. Alongside this, it raises the matter of deception, the growing presence of dishonesty and falsehood. When separating truth from misinformation becomes increasingly difficult and false narratives travel fast, the book presents that too as a meaningful indicator. Following this, attention turns to the effect on younger people and children. The text suggests that when, from an early age, certain influences or ideas take root that gradually erode a clear sense of right and wrong, that development can also be understood as a sign of a society moving through a significant transition. When a small number of individuals or institutions hold an excessive concentration of authority, that situation also falls within this same framework. Once important decisions are restricted to only a handful of people, the question of who answers for those decisions becomes far more pressing. The text also addresses a growing imbalance within the natural world. Some people today connect this with environmental shifts and instability in nature, though that remains their own reading of the material, since the text itself never directly references modern circumstances. This is precisely where the threshold theory enters the picture. The core idea is that many of society's problems build gradually over time, yet eventually they reach a breaking point, a threshold. Beyond that point, things can no longer remain as they were, and a period of transformation begins. Certain modern interpretations also link this concept to today's deeply interconnected world, where information, wealth, and decisions can travel across the entire globe within moments. But the most essential point remains this: the whole framework is an interpretive model. It must not be treated as confirmed prophecy. Different scholars and researchers approach it from different angles and reach different conclusions. Therefore, no definitive claim can be made about 2026 or any other particular moment in time. Up to this point, the focus has been on the warning portions of the Book of Enoch. But when you read the complete text carefully, something becomes unmistakably clear. It is not solely concerned with wrongdoing and judgment. It carries within it a message of hope as well. That hope is embodied by the remnant, a group of people who continue walking the right path even when the surrounding times are difficult. The book also refers to these individuals as the righteous and the chosen. Yet here, the concept of the chosen carries no connection to any specific nation, ethnic background, or institution. The emphasis instead falls entirely on how a person decides to conduct their own life. Those who stand firmly for truth, integrity, and what is genuinely right are considered to belong to this group. When wrongdoing begins to spread through society, the Book of Enoch suggests that the greatest challenge lies in the path each person decides to walk. Those who refuse to be drawn into corruption, deception, and moral failure are seen as aligning themselves with the very order that the book returns to time and again. The real battle is not about transforming others, but about staying honest with yourself. In this same discussion, the book also touches on supernatural authority. Some readers understand this as a literal, otherworldly force, while many scholars treat it as a symbolic concept. In their view, it may simply suggest that when a broken system starts to crumble, the voices of those standing for truth and fairness gradually grow louder. Put differently, change does not arrive only through force, but also through sound judgment and deliberate choices. Grok made a very similar observation in its own analysis. It noted that the destiny of any technology ultimately rests in human hands. Regardless of how sophisticated artificial intelligence becomes, it does not arrive at decisions independently. Human values, intentions, and accountability are always the driving force behind it. So the real question is never about the technology itself, but about the people who choose to direct it. That is precisely why the closing message of the Book of Enoch is not rooted in fear, but in responsibility and genuine hope. It reminds us that no matter how overwhelming circumstances become, people always retain the ability to choose the righteous path. Perhaps that is one of the reasons this ancient text continues to stir reflection even today. Now, let us briefly bring the entire story together in straightforward terms. We have seen that the Book of Enoch is a remarkably old religious writing that carries within it ideas such as the 70 generations, the Watchers, the heavenly calendar, the apocalypse of weeks, and the remnant. By drawing these various threads together, Grok set out to explore whether any meaningful connection might exist between these ancient concepts and the world we live in now. So in this analysis, the year 2026 came up as a period that certain people read as a moment of transition and significant change. But the most crucial thing to keep in mind here is the distinction between hard evidence and personal interpretation. The Book of Enoch is a genuinely ancient text that actually exists. It appears among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church continues to recognize it as part of its official scripture to this day. Those are straightforward historical facts. However, taking the ideas found within this book and connecting them to the modern world, and particularly to the year 2026, that part is interpretation. Historians, religious scholars, and researchers are far from unanimous on this matter. In the same way, the analysis from Grok should not be treated as the definitive answer. Artificial intelligence can process enormous volumes of information and spot patterns across them, but it cannot determine the ultimate meaning of a religious text. It carries its own limitations, and its conclusions are shaped by how it processes and understands the data available to it. That is exactly why this whole conversation deserves to be approached with a genuinely open mind. It would be wrong to accept everything here without pausing to think, and it would be equally wrong to dismiss it entirely without taking the time to understand it properly. If this subject genuinely interests you, the wisest path forward is to read the Book of Enoch for yourself, look into the perspectives of various scholars, and then arrive at your own conclusion. The Book of Enoch is not a scientific forecast. Grok's response is also an interpretation, not some final settled truth. But one thing does seem clear. It has pulled a 2,000-year-old text right back into the heart of modern conversation. And now, the choice really is yours. Is this simply a coincidence, or is it a perspective that genuinely deserves some thought? Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and if you found the video worthwhile, go ahead and like and share it as well.